All right, welcome everybody to CSRM's Tuesday Talks, and these are on COVID conversations, and it is a series of four of them this month, and it's every Tuesday at noon Eastern Time. And so we are talking about youth sports today in the church, and we can extend that out to dance or other things as well. And then we're going to talk about some other issues coming up, the fitness ministry, and then how do we organize our finances around this, because a lot of folks have been hurt financially, and particularly those that they get paid if they run programs. There's just some things that we're going to be addressing about the finances overall. And then the last one is going to be about facilities and how do we deal with the spacing and the new world order, so to speak. So welcome everybody. Here's a couple of things just in general before we actually dive into it. For all those who have not been invited as a co-conversationalist here, I would ask that you would mute yourself, and that would just help if there's any background noise. And then at any time along the way, if you go typically down to the bottom of your screen, there's a place that says chat, and you can click on that and then type in whatever you want to talk to about. If please know that it's going to go to everybody unless you designate it. There's kind of a drop-down menu. You click on it, you get the person you want. So you could send a question to either Dan Stoffer or myself, and we'll try to entertain some digital questions like that. So that's how you can get involved in this conversation. Does everybody understand? Mute yourself, and then chat your questions to us as we go through this, because we do want you to help us as we think this through by asking questions, and let's just jump into it from there. So Dan Stouffer, go ahead. You give us your current situation, who you are and where you're at, and as a co-host of this today.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're doing great. My name is Dan Stouffer, and I was a student of Dr. Linville's years ago. For our pre-meeting, I said how long ago, and I think that maybe offended him because it will probably make him feel just a bit old. But we're excited that you guys are here. I also am with CSRM as the Director of Church Relations, and I also am a pastor, been in full-time ministry for about 18 years. And am currently in Columbus, Ohio, where I'm helping a church plant some churches, and been around sports for a long time, been a sports minister. I was thinking through my career in ministry, and every church I was a part of had some form of a sports ministry. And so it's a blessing. Right now it's a challenge, I'm sure, for many of you, and just excited to be a part of this forum here to see how we can help each other during this pandemic.
Very good. Steve
Ousley, Athletic Director of Highland Park HB Sports in Florida. Enjoying good weather, much like Mr. Coleman's background, but not many sports. So we're just taking it day by day as we try to get ready to reintegrate back into sports. Right now, it's currently about a 60-40 split on parents that want to come back compared to parents that aren't ready to come back. But each day that changes. So excited about the discussion today and look forward to learning from all of you guys and girls.
Very good. Lauren.
Yeah, my name is Lauren Hudgens. I'm an associate for sports and fitness at Johnson Ferry Baptist Church. I've been there about 3 years, and I particularly work with our soccer programs, upward softball, and our worship through dance program. also helping out with mission trips and camps as needed. But like Steve said, we're currently on hold with everything and just waiting to see kind of how everything pans out. We're not necessarily canceling the summer programs, but we're still waiting to see what happens week by week before we make that call.
John Longworth.
Hey, I am John Longworth. I'm the pastor of recreation and senior adults at Germantown Baptist Church. I have been on staff here for almost 20 years now, if I make it another couple of months. Stupid between now and the 1st of July. And we are in the process of, probably will announce this afternoon that we'll have some folks back on campus for the first time in, gosh, a month and a half for worship Sunday, May 17th. And then we have a multi-phase approach to reopening, but that will be the first Sunday that we'll have folks back on campus for worship. And I and everybody else who is on pastoral staff here at our church is involved in that planning process. And so, yeah, recreation has taken a little bit of a back seat over these last couple of weeks or a few weeks to church-wide activities, but we look forward to being able to kick some things off in the not too distant future.
Very good. And Gary Coleman, I mean, we just have to ask you, are you in your office right now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's a tough place, isn't it? To minister. Yeah, it's great. Well, folks, let's just jump into it. Free-flowing conversation with these folks that have just introduced themselves. And so to that panel of co-conversationalists, I would ask a starting question, and Dan, you can ask the next one, all right? First question for you guys is, why did you shut down all of you have said you kind of shut down for a while, and how did you feel about that? What's going on in that shutdown? Lauren, we're gonna lead off with you, and then Steve, and then John.
Yeah, that sounds great. So we actually had multiple programs that we talked about. We had some soccer player development programs going on. We chose to cancel because it was an 8-week program where some of our children didn't even get 1 week of programming in. So that was, and it was also a program where we don't have much ministry in it. It's just kind of an off-season soccer program opposite of our fall soccer league. So that decision was fairly easy because we also outsourced the coaches for it. And the program that we use for the coaches, they use coaches that they bring from Brazil and the UK, their coaches back home because of the pandemic. So that one was an easy answer all around. As far as our dance program, it has continued. So we had about a week off between our in-class rehearsals and our Zoom classes for us to kind of organize everything and put it together. But we are still going strong with our dance program online. They should technically be in rehearsals this week to have their recital on Friday. But because we can't meet in person and we felt like it was too risky to even postpone it, we decided to do a virtual recital. So in that aspect, we didn't, but it's all been how much can we keep the kids involved. And then on the Upward baseball softball side, that was a really hard decision for us. What we really thought about during that process was how many people can meet and be in one area at a time. With it being baseball softball season, you're talking about a sport where you have to have 9 kids minimum for baseball and 10 minimum for softball. And right there in place, we were meeting the maximum without even adding coaches, parents, and the other team in that space. Our shelter in place has since ended. However, we then thought about the conversations we were having with our parents and with our coaches. And we thought about, we had one family in particular, one of our top-notch coaches. He had 3 kids just on one team alone that he was coaching. And him and his 3 kids all had asthma. And we kind of used it as an example of what it would look like if we tried to have teams come back in June. And we said, well, if this team is an example and the head coach, who's one of our best head coaches, can't come back because he's high risk, and then his 3 kids don't come back because they're all high risk, then we've just lost the head coach and a quarter of the team. And you can't, so we had 12 kids on a baseball team. You can't have just 9 kids and hope that everyone shows. So it really came down to, with our baseball softball program, if we were to continue into June, we'd be looking at redrafting all of our teams, reassigning all of our coaches, and then even the uniforms, then we'd have to restart. So we said it was better to kind of wipe the slate clean with our baseball and softball programs. And then if we're able to do programming in June, we would modify it so that it's only a certain amount of kids on the field at a time, and we were able to meet all of the social distancing restrictions and feel like we were providing a safe atmosphere for the kids. Same thing kind of happened with our basketball program. We have 2 basketball programs that would be going on right now. An all-star basketball travel team. They're still meeting with their coaches via Zoom every week. But then our basketball league, we did cancel that as well, and kind of for the same reasons as even if we did come back, what percentage of kids would actually show up.
Others?
So for us, we didn't really have a choice in the matter. It was the perfect storm in a horrible way for us. We had just under 1,400 kids that had signed up for volleyball, soccer, and flag football. We held evaluations, ordered the uniforms on Monday, and then it came out, hey, school's canceled. So we figured, okay, we're only going to have to do this for a couple weeks. We canceled practices, said, hey, we'll resume. And of course, that continued to get pushed out until eventually it became apparent that we were going to have to cancel the season. We were blessed in the sense that out of all of those kids, only about 160 requested a refund. Everyone else decided to push to our fall leagues. So that saved us tremendously, because otherwise we would have had to refund $110,000, which would have killed our budget. So we were blessed in that sense, but certainly we're bummed. I mean, I eat, breathe, and live sports. I'm playing out, we have our 2021 is already planned out. And then now I can't even plan out next month because you don't know what restrictions are going to be in or out. So we sent out a feedback poll to all of our parents. It was a 60-40 split. 60 wanted to come back to sports immediately and want to play now in May, even though we're not allowed. And then that goes up to 70-30 in June. So we're hoping here in Florida, we're in phase 1 and phase 2, which should start mid-month, that we will have the opportunity to open with summer camps in the beginning of June. A lot of the parents are honestly tired of being at home with their kids, so they're anxious for their kids to have an outlet and something to do, but we want to do that safely. And so that's been our biggest struggle, is how do you do that safely? Is that taking a temperature, or does that even matter? Because if you're asymptomatic, what does it matter if you don't have a fever because you're still carrying? Does that mean that we, sanitize the ball every time somebody touches it? So we're working through that with our staff and getting feedback from our parents on how we can resume safely in the summer. But our church was blessed. We applied and received the CARES Act, so our salaries were covered for 8 weeks. So that was a blessing which kept us out of the red. And now it's just a matter of when we're allowed to go back. We're ready to go back 100%.
Steve, you bring up a good point. That one of the things I know we've been advising churches to do is to take that kind of a survey with their people. And just to give you an example, and you can design this any way you want. And by the way, you can use the chat room if you want to have Steve send you what his survey was, how he conducted that. Just chat to him, and then you guys can connect in that way. But a typical question would be, like for youth sports, we would say, if here's your options. Do you want to have your child return immediately, or give a date, or if this condition, or not for another year, kind of give them a spectrum. And that'll give you a real good sense of where they're at and what you're up against. So I think it's a great move there. And John, you have anything to add to that conversation?
Yeah, you talked about you asked about how we felt about the shutdown. And, I think for us, providentially, the timing was just about perfect. We had just wrapped up basketball season a couple of weeks previously. We were gearing up for baseball, but we had not yet finished recruiting coaches. We didn't have kids out there doing evaluations and drafting teams, and practices had not begun. We had just finished a gymnastics semester, and we're taking a 2-week break before kicking off another one. And so there wasn't a lot of stopping and starting and the trouble that some others have had to face. It was a good break for us, probably one of only 2 times during the course of an entire year that it would have worked out that way for us. But like everybody else, we were pretty bummed about not being able to start baseball. And we held off with that decision for as long as we could. And with dealing with sister churches that we work with, we decided we would wait and see how this played out, potentially starting the season a little bit late, having a more abbreviated season, more compact season, more games or less practices. We were just trying to keep all of our options open for as long as we could, but it became more and more apparent that the longer it went on, the less likely it would be that we would be able to salvage a baseball season. And so we reluctantly, not too long ago, had to cancel baseball for the summer. Now we're in a situation where the county that our church is located in has begun opening things up progressively. And we could have opened our facility yesterday. But in my thinking, as a pastor on staff at our church, it probably would not have communicated well for us to open a facility when the church had not gathered for corporate worship yet. And so that probably is not going to happen until Sunday, May 17th. And so we're looking at the possibility of opening Monday, May 18th. And we're dealing with CDC guidelines and expectations that our community, our county has placed on us. And how do we do that? And I know that's for another conversation here in a couple of weeks, probably. But so that's been a lot of our focus at this point. How do we, in working with the church, how do we open our facility? How do we get people involved going forward? And we had to cancel pretty much everything in May and July from a recreation standpoint as far as programming. We'll be able to do some facility things over these next couple of months, but we had to cancel a basketball camp, a big basketball camp that we have in early June. But my thinking there was, if Vacation Bible School is not happening, if student ministry camps and mission trips aren't happening, it would be probably just not sit well for us to be bringing people together in large groups when other ministries of the church were having to forgo those ministry opportunities. So sometimes you just have to be a team player.
Dan.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest questions that I love to hear from the speakers here is, when we come back, and I know every state's different, right? So I know it's a little bit slower for some, and some of you are further down that road. But when we come back and are able to start to offer more ministries in person, more leagues, especially when it comes to youth, the biggest issue in my mind are the parents, right? How can we find that balance where we're not operating out of fear? Because I think for the most part, kids will overcome pretty quickly, but you have to get the parents to want to register and bring their kids to your leagues, to your ministries. And so what can we do to find that balance where, on one end, we've got masks on and gloves, and we're trying to teach kids a sport or dance or something. On the other end, we have people who are saying crazy things like this isn't real, and they're not wanting to wear anything. So what can we do with this idea of fearful parents and potentially fearful children?
Let's reverse it. Go ahead, John. Lead us off.
Yeah, short answer for me is, man, I don't know. As I mentioned in a conversation we had last week, none of us have led through a global pandemic before. We're trying to figure it out as we go, and finding that balance between communicating to people in a way that they feel safe, that they feel like we're making their safety and security a priority, while at the same time being able to actually accomplish anything, and to be able to bring groups together is a real challenge. And in our circle, it's really too early to be able to gauge that. We're just trying to have to figure it out as we go. And that was one of our concerns, and part of what led to our decision to cancel baseball when we did. We felt like even if we were to try to have a season that didn't start until even mid-May, would there be enough participants, families that would be willing to have their children sit next to one another, cheek to cheek, so to speak, on benches in the dugout? And would parents want to congregate and sit in the bleachers? And we felt like they're not ready yet. And I think even, a month or two from now, and if things turn around quickly, we're still going to be at a point where there are going to be a lot of people that are uncomfortable. And I think we'll see a decline in participation, and we've got to figure out strategically, how do we deal with that? What decisions do we make, and how do we accommodate smaller groups? Soccer, for example, rather than 11v11, do you have more small-sided games, even with the older kids? It's just, we're just going to have to be flexible and figure it out as we go.
Steve, Lauren, what do you guys have to add to that?
I think John hit it on the head. I mean, who knows? I don't think there's a right answer. The only thing that we've tried to focus on is how can we let people feel at ease, because the only thing that we really know for sure is we're going to make somebody upset, or we're going to offend someone. If we go back to sports, the people that are afraid, they're going to be offended. If you don't do sports, your people that aren't afraid and are ready, they're going to be offended. So we've tried to do it in a non-confrontational manner. For summer camps, for instance, we have our registration is open, but you don't have to pay. And so we just communicated very honestly, hey, we don't know if we're going to be open or not, but we want to know who's interested, because it's one thing to answer a survey and say, yes, I will send my kid to camp. It's another thing to fill out the registration so that, the Friday before camp, you're on the hook. So that's helping us gauge how many people actually want to return. But then when people return, we have an email that's set to go out tomorrow that just says, hey, don't judge people. Everybody feels differently about this. If you're ready to return, that's great. If you feel that when you return you need to wear a mask, wear a mask. Or, obviously follow social distancing. Whatever, the government is recommending that we do, state and locally, that's what we want to do. But we don't want to have a thing where you have this group of people that's looking at this group of people wearing masks and judging them. And we've let them know, hey, we're going to clean our equipment in between all of the games and things like that, just so that they will kind of have that sense of comfort, and even doing the temperature checks. But the bottom line is there is no foolproof way. So it's just little things that we can do to try to give them that sense of ease. And then at the end of the day, you have to wait. People are going to come back as they feel safe.
So, Greg, if I could throw in real quick, it's really hard to do sports from a distance. How do you make that work?
Greg, if I can jump in for just a second, this may sound rather simplistic, but I think all of us at some point have to become those who lead people scripturally. And while I have not counted, my understanding is that there are 365 fear nots in Scripture. I think in the information we put out to people, whether it's in our print literature or electronic literature, I think we need to continue to keep in front of them the fact that we serve a sovereign God who is in control of this situation. We are his emissaries who need to help people come to that point of trusting God.
Thank you, Roger. So, Steve, you bring up a couple interesting things there. One is, did I catch it right? that you're not collecting a fee, just a registration? And is part of that because you don't want to be on the hook for $50,000 and have to return it all? And I mean, that's a lot of person hours to do all that. And is that part of what you're thinking there?
That's part of it. And the other thing is we want our parents to not be worried because we have a no refund policy.
Right.
So they're, well, I don't want to pay for camp because if they can't go forward, then I lose, my $75. No, we're not here for the money. We're here for the kids. So we're not going to ask you to pay until the Friday before camp. That way we have the latest and greatest up-to-date information from our, state and local government. So if they say, hey, look, it's not safe, we got to push back another 2 weeks, we can do that. And nobody's lost any money and we don't have to waste the man hours of returning funds. But if they say, hey, everything's looking good, you guys athletics, then hey, we're on the field with those that feel comfortable and are ready to return to that.
So I love that. And you also brought up the issue about mask or protection kinds of issues. And Lauren, I will come to you to answer this, but also to keep the round table going here. Have you, at your church, have you thought any about the mask situation and other kinds of things? Do you want all of your participants to wear them? But just pick up on the conversation there, Lauren.
Yeah, so what has at least come down the chain from our senior pastor is that because the government is not requiring people to wear masks, we will not require people to wear masks, but we will still strongly encourage them to follow all the social distancing guidelines that are put in place. And our senior pastor has said that, we're taking baby steps to come back in terms of we have a 4-step process put in place. And he has encouraged us that, when we go back to work on Monday, and that is part of our second step in our steps to regather. And I believe yesterday in our all staff meeting, he said, I would really like you to wear masks. I don't want to enforce it, but we're trying to do everything we can to also get hand sanitizer and everything. I also do think there should be some concern as well that if we ask kids to play masks or wear masks while they're playing, how much difficulty are they going to have while playing that? I think there's definitely a concern there too, that if you are having a flag football game and wearing a mask, I can just see that being very overwhelming as an adult playing sports, let alone as a kid, that it could just change everything in terms of uncomfortable. It makes you hot. It is something else for another person to snag on you in terms of safety. And then also it's just not quite as simple to breathe out of if it's a cloth mask. So we have, again, just going back to, I don't think we're going to ever require it. We'll definitely strongly encourage it. But, it's kind of like what John said. None of us have lived through this to really know what the right answer is. And we're going to probably follow the lead of our worship. Our in-person worship resumes June 7th. And throughout the summer, unless things start looking more favorable for our area, worship will be the only time where we gather through August. So we're kind of looking at worship and what they're doing. They're trying to figure out how to get people to sit 6 feet apart. What are they going to look like with their masks, and just trying to take their lead. Our big thing with whatever we decide to do is we want to make sure that the church as a whole is unified. Just coming from a mega church in Atlanta, we don't want to cancel Grand Camp, which is a camp for little preschoolers and their grandparents to go to, because we're worried about their health and safety. And then that same week continue hosting day camp or basketball camp or something else. Our big thing is just whatever we do, let's make sure we're unified as a church.
Well, as we continue this roundtable, continuing to go, and let's stay on the mask thing a little bit, and as well as how we're organizing and communicating these things to people, I think that it's pretty obvious that it should have been even before the call, but even now, I mean, we're talking with some folks that literally have thousands of kids in their programs over the course of the year. And when they are vulnerable enough to say, we don't know, we're kind of struggling with this ourselves, it's all the more reason why we're doing these COVID conversations, because we're all learning together. No one has ever been through this. And yes, Dan, I am old, but I didn't go through the Spanish flu epidemic of the early 1900s. So none of us have been involved in any of this. And so we're kind of learning about how to do that. But others, Steve or John, about the mask, and have you and your churches, has anybody talked to your insurance companies and your liability that you have from not only opening up, but have you had any conversation with your administrative pastors at your churches about how to engage in this? And I'm also going to ask you to consider another question, and that as you kind of move it around a circle here, and that has to do with the particular sport. Lauren mentioned flag football, that when there's that much physical contact, that it could be problematic. Does this kind of strategy or strategic thinking, does it make you think about, well, maybe this is the time we need to move to some other sport, that there wouldn't be that kind of contact? And just keep in mind that insurance companies rate these things as collision sports. Think American football, rugby, ice hockey. And then there is contact sports, which is more basketball, soccer, or football in most of the world, as it's called. And then there's the non-contact sports, and that's volleyball and golf and what have you. So as three panelists talk about the mask, talking to your insurance and your administrative people about legal liabilities and lawsuits and concerns that you have with all of that, and what sports. Any of you want to jump in on that?
Go ahead.
Steve, go ahead.
I said I'll be the guinea pig. Just being transparent, we got a semi-truck of food to hand out, during this. But one of the requirements was we had to wear a mask. I quite honestly don't ever want to wear a mask again. It was horribly uncomfortable, and I get for safety purposes why they're there. But when Lauren was talking, I can only imagine how a kid, a 5-year-old, you're strapping this thing on their face, they can't breathe right, they're hot. Those things aren't even going to stay on. So it's probably not even feasible to wear them. So that's my take on the mask. But as far as parents, that's who we're saying, hey, if you guys want to wear a mask on the sidelines, have at it, because the kids seem to be at a much less risk anyway. As far as liability, we are actually creating a document for our registration where you have to sign off and say, if I contract COVID while playing sports, I release the church. And that's really just to say that we have it, because to my knowledge, there's no way to pinpoint when you contract, COVID, let alone the flu or something like that. But it's something that our church is also looking at doing when we go back to holding service, and they have a board meeting tonight, is, okay, we're going to take temps at the door. If you're symptomatic, we're going to send you home. But we also want you to sign a waiver before you come into the church, just to avoid the liability side of it.
That's a good point, Steve. And if you're not aware of this, these liabilities are different in every state and every country around the world. And so one of the things that we have often recommended through CSRM is that you link with other churches in your community. Like a couple of you are from the Central Florida area that are on the call. You guys should get together, and you should have a very similar, if you will, waiver. because what happens is when you go to the court of law, they're going to say, well, what's the standard of care in your community? And if you're the only one that has this particular lack or positive in your forms that people sign, then you're not going according to the standard of care in your community. But if you can do it with other churches in your community, then that will help you in this regard. But don't miss out what Steve just said. It's so important that you now add on to your waiver forms about COVID, and they are releasing you from that. Now, again, most states, you have to understand tort law, and that is that a person, a family cannot give away a right they don't have currently. So, in essence, what you're asking them to sign would probably not hold up in court, except for the fact that it would show due diligence on your part. And that's a huge thing. Plus, it's going to help when it comes down to the fact that you could go to them and say, you know, you signed this. We all knew there was a risk. And why would you want to sue us and then ruin it for all these other kids? So at any rate, that's just some pickup. Lauren or John, keep going on this topic here.
Yeah, I'll just add on the mask. I can't imagine any scenario where an athlete is having to wear a mask as part of participation. That's a challenge. You don't even want to wear them in the office. We have medical releases, liability waivers that I think are pretty strong, but even with that, we will be adding, to your point, some verbiage about COVID-19 when we do registrations for our sports and for active participants. When we reopen the facility, in addition to some of the other paperwork that we have in place, we'll be having people fill out and sign questionnaires that we think will help protect the church. But one of the things when we start to gather for worship in about a week and a half, we're following all the CDC guidelines. We're following all of the standards and protocols that are being put in place by our local governments. And so we think that alone would be enough to protect us. But we're also going to go the extra mile and encourage anybody that might fall into one of those, the elderly, or if you fall into one of those categories where you may be more at risk, we would just encourage personal responsibility. And I think those are two key words. We can't protect everybody all the time from everything. People have to make decisions, and they have to accept some degree of personal responsibility for their actions, whether that's participating in an event or an activity or coming to worship in the era of COVID-19.
There's some people that have joined in a little bit later. We're welcoming you to this, and if you want to catch the first part of it, it's being recorded. It's going to be made available here over the next week or so. And we would like everybody to mute their selves so that we don't get background noise. And also, feel free to use that chat room. And if you want to get the particular like forms that people have, just chat somebody that's talking and say, can you send that to me? And you can also contact CSRM directly, and we can move it on. Lauren, any thoughts you've had?
Yeah, just going back to, you asked about, like, do we change sports to where, there's less contact involved? An idea I've thrown out to our team, but it hasn't been very well received. And I think it's more of like just a disappointment that we're not ready to go there yet, is so we do upward programming, we do upward soccer in the fall, and we do 4v4 all the way, or I'm sorry, we do 3v3 for our 4-year-olds all the way through 7v7 for 5th grade. And then our middle schoolers are not technically upward, but just a whole nother animal. We differ from the upward rules. Upward had entered a period where they had encouraged 4v4 for everyone, and we had kind of kept to the rules that we had done in the past because historically they had worked for us. But an idea I've already thrown out is maybe this is the year where we need to do upwards recommended 4v4 all the way up through 5th grade. Is it ideal from a player development aspect? No. Is it close to what these kids would be experiencing on a normal soccer team? No. But at the same time, they would still get the opportunity to play soccer, even if it was 4v4. And that might ease parents' concerns going into a soccer season where they're used to 12 kids being on a team plus 2 coaches. And so when all is said and done, you're looking at 28 people without even spectators. So we know the talk is coming, but I think right now where we're at is just not ready to go down that road, because it would be very disappointing to have to change our programs. And I say that just in terms of like everything has already been very disappointing, just in terms of, canceling baseball and softball and basketball and making our dancers do a virtual recital that for the kids' sake and the parents' sake, I want to prevent as much of that as possible. But that's the only program we've really talked about adjusting at all. We have talked about adjusting class maximums for our dance classes as well. Usually we max them out about 12, but if we end up with dance camp this summer, we'll probably do smaller groups just to make it easier on parents as we adjust back to our new normal.
Excellent. Dan, questions or your thoughts?
I think that these are all great points, great thoughts here. I think, this is a whole new world, and we're going to have to be flexible, figure some stuff out. I would love to kind of, if you're cool with this, Greg, steer it a little bit different now. I'm just thinking of some people I see on the call here who they worship in a gym, right? So there's that whole side of things. And there's people here who are starting out in sports ministry, and COVID-19 came at a very interesting time for them. So I'd love to hear from the panel. How would you encourage people who are leading sports ministries to just keep pressing on? Because there's going to be lots of concerns. We've already talked about a few of those, but especially those who are new to this whole game and have to figure this out. And I know we don't have all the concrete answers, but how would you encourage them to keep moving forward to have a successful sports ministry at their church?
And just before you answer that, it's a great question. Anybody that wants their question answered, just chat myself or Dan, please. Go ahead, panelists.
One of the things I'd throw out is to try to find ways to make yourself valuable to the team outside of your sports and recreation ministry. You're going to be limited probably for some time in what you can do relative to sports ministry, but there might be some things you can do to help your senior pastor or your administrative pastor or others in leadership that take some of the burden, some of the load off of them, and you're still plugged into the life of the church. And in addition to that, look for ways to encourage people and to stay connected with people who have participated in your sports, fitness, and rec ministries. Emails, phone calls, cards, just ways for you to maintain that touch, to let them know you care, you're still thinking about them, you're praying for them, and you look forward to that day that we're able to get back into the swing of things. But those are some small steps that you can take right away to maintain your value to the team, and to keep the people that have been connected in your sports ministries who may not be plugged into the life of the church, to keep them connected in some way while we navigate these waters.
I think it's a good point, and I would add to it before the other panelists jump in that if you, this is one of the times that we have started to experience as we've talked to people around the country and world, that this is one of the times now that the sports and rec and fitness ministry of the church is really being more appreciated by the senior pastor and staff, the elders, because if you were to go to that person, to those groups of people in your church and say to them, guys and gals, you know what? For years, we have been contacting and connecting with these families and these individuals. but they have never felt comfortable coming to our worship experience and joining our body life of the church. But now that everything's online and we're streaming all of our services and we're doing everything, they will feel less vulnerable in tuning in on their computer. And we're going to encourage you to even think about that in this coming week's services. How many people are going to actually tune in via their computer and they're going to be able to hear the gospel? But are you willing to adapt your message and the whole thing that you do to welcome those people in and keep them in tune? And so you've got the context, people, of all those people out there. And now's the time that you can deliver them to the church. Don't overlook that great way of serving the overall church. Great points there, John. Lauren, Steve, anything?
Yeah, just tagging on what you just said, as far as, reaching the unchurched, one of the first things we did was we looked at all of our registrants for baseball and softball season, and part of the registration, they put what church they go to. So we set aside all of our participants who do not go to church, and we were able to call every single one of them. And we had a script that kind of said what we were doing, checking in on them, seeing how everything was going, did they need anything. And then one of the last things we would do before we got off the phone with them was offer to pray with them over the phone, and then try and engage them into our virtual worship. And that was very well received by our participants. They just couldn't believe that we were calling to check on them. I had a couple of them break into tears because of the things going on in their life circumstances. And it just goes back to what John was saying about, this is your opportunity to wear a team hat for the church. That, before we got sent home to work, I was packing boxes for some local homeless shelters for people to hand out whose children typically depended on school lunches. So just being ready to help out other ministries wherever we can. And then the other thing I would just encourage people to think about is, not sure what experience others would have in sports for special needs kids, but just like you can adapt a sport for a child with special needs, whether they're deaf or they're autistic or they're blind, we too can continue to adapt sports in ways that meet the current needs of our situation. It definitely takes creativity and ingenuity, but it's possible. And we already talked about, does that mean we look at golf, we look at tennis, we look at volleyball? I just think it's a time for us to get creative with what we want to do and how we do it. It's just another hurdle to jump in everything we do, but we're all fully capable. And at the end of the day, sports are going to be one of the things that people keep coming back to. I know it's hard when their finances get tough, but something I'm not sure about other churches and what your budget looks like, but we are one of the most affordable programs as well in our area. So that's in our favor in terms of we can really reel people in with our price point too, to just continue to focus on that kingdom vision. And that would be my last recommendation, is just remember that we are in this for the whole kingdom of God. We're not in this just for our church necessarily.
And Greg, if I can just throw out real quick, I like that Lauren mentioned the need to be creative. And I would add, if you didn't like the way something was going in your sports ministry now, this is an incredible time to do something differently. People are going to give you the benefit of the doubt, and you'll get away with some things that you might not have been able to do.
Excellent points. And Steve, keep going on this theme, but we've got some chats going on here that there's a few folks, and you're in a kind of a semi situation like this, that if you're not connected to a church, how can you help that church? How can you help those churches out there if you're in a sports related paraministry per se? Any ideas about that?
I think this whole pandemic has actually created a neat relationship with the church and sports that wasn't there before. Our church runs about 2,000. Our sports program has over 5,000. So when this all happened, it's what do we do? Obviously, you know that more so than ever, people are going to be open to the idea of faith and to learning about Christ because they don't know what else, to put their hope or faith in. So it created a neat opportunity for us. And we did the same thing that Lauren did. We called everybody in our sports program, had everybody on our staff doing that. And it was amazing to hear the stories and the prayer requests that came out of this, that just in sports or in passing, you may have never have learned that about them. And people were so appreciative of that. And the follow-up calls that some of our pastors now get to call and say, hey, we know that you're a part of our sports program, and we heard that you were dealing with this, and we just want you to know that we're praying. And then we took it even further and put those prayer requests out on a Google Doc, and now you have the whole church praying for those. And then we put that on our Facebook. Hey, just so you guys know, if you guys gave us a prayer request, our entire church now is joining with you and praying about that. And we actually saw our numbers go up about 1,500 of online viewing. So we're hoping that it's kind of opening that door for people that otherwise would have never stepped foot into a church. But now they're kind of getting to see it online. They're feeling validated and cared for because they got that personal phone call to make that connection. And so I'm excited. And I actually challenged our pastor. I said, you better figure out what to do, because when we're able to come back to church, you're not going to be able to fit everybody in the sanctuary. So it's provided a neat experience for us.
And the research is already coming out after this first month that the Googling for prayer has gone through the ceiling. Unprecedented people looking for spiritual and prayerful kinds of contact. And so whether you're directly with the local church or in sports-related paraministry, this is a time to connect people to the church, as we said before. And you're going to find a lot of people this is the time to really pull them in. Also think creatively that should we ever have professional baseball again, to do those fantasy leagues or the fantasy football league. Those are some ways that a lot of churches have been grabbing hold at this time as well. And I'll just let you know, before we get to the top of the hour here, before anybody starts dropping off, I want to let everybody know that this has been recorded. It'll be up and live within a week, I would say, at the most. And then you can refer back to it if you weren't here for the whole time, what was said earlier, or if you have other people that you want to watch it, listen to it, you can have that as well. So keep that in mind. Also, we're going to be talking about fitness, health, wellness ministries next week and how we're dealing with this in terms of the pandemic. The third week, we're talking about finances. And then the fourth week, we're talking about facilities. So we've got each Tuesday in May for these Tuesday talks. And so be sure to come back to us.
Right.
And, yeah.
Kind of jumping off of what John said, rather than lament what's going on, we need to redeem the time. I believe every one of us has said, well, if I only had time, I would get this done or that done. And I think there's organization and administrative things, there's team building things, there's discipleship. There's a lot of things that we could get after because we have the time to do so now.
Very good. We're also getting some questions about a few other things. And if anybody could chat in about give the specific, what's being asked for is give specific additions that you have for your waiver forms. What are you adding to them about COVID? We could get a kind of a collective movement in that way. Also, we're getting some that are talking about how do we take disinfecting to the next level. And I'm going to say that we're going to address that more in week 4 in our facilities. So at least watch that if you can't be there live. But there is obviously a new world in that regard too. I would also let you know that CSRM, does weekly podcasts, and we're in the middle of a series on sports to those that have some limitations. And I just can't recommend it to you enough. We've got the leader of a nationwide ministry that's helping us out to understand how to do those kinds of special needs sports and rec. And this might be a time to open up that kind of thing. All right, so we've come down to kind of last words here, and we're going to start. Lauren, last thoughts?
Yeah, I think my last thoughts would be the biggest thing that I've seen in all of our programs, because we've gone from canceling some, trying to postpone, end up canceling, to like I mentioned earlier, we're seeing our dance program out to the end. It's definitely modified, but the biggest things I've seen with our parents and just having them on our team is, one, communicating as transparent as you can. I know we can't tell them everything, but at the same time, just keeping them in the loop, keeping them informed, and then also just let them know your heart in all of this. That, with our dance program in particular, up until last Friday, we really were trying to postpone the recital to early June and trying to see what that would look like. And there were a lot of factors that made us not choose to do that. But because we kind of expressed our heart in all of it to our parents, and we communicated with them that they knew it was a possibility to postpone it. And then when we canceled it, they knew the reasons why. It helped a lot, that instead of getting feedback of, I can't believe you're doing this, this was done prematurely, we're getting really great feedback as to, thank you for doing everything you could, you have great leadership. That it's just been really rewarding, and it's all just a result of being able to communicate with our parents and not leave them hanging throughout all of this.
I'm going to ask each of the panelists to just chat your email address, or however you would want people to get in touch with you. And so everybody else can check that out. There's been a number of chats, if you're not following along the chats, that are giving some answers to some of these things along the way. So make sure you look at that. Steve, last words?
You talked earlier about for the guys that just got in this before the bottom kind of fell out, and really it goes for anybody that's been in this for any amount of time. Don't give up. Sports, faith-based sports, is the best thing ever. You cannot, or so far no one has been able to convince me that there is a better way to reach the lost for Christ than through sports. It's non-confrontational. You're able to build relationships in something that's familiar to people, is safe to people, and something that sports is never going away. So we got to meet them where they are, which is on the field or on the court. So regardless of where you are, do not give up, because you are providing, blessings to people that you don't even know about. And so when you're talking to people or posting, stay positive, because it's infectious. If you're fired up and you're excited about returning whenever it's safe, then other people are going to feed off of that. So don't feed into the gloom and doom. We serve an amazing God, and we're all going to get through this. So stick with that, and we're going to make it out all right.
Yeah, and my closing thoughts just mirror on what Steve said. I was going to say, be encouraged for a couple of reasons. One, we know that as a man thinketh, so is he. And so I have to make myself think positively sometimes, because any of us can be prone to be discouraged. And the other reason I think that's important is because people are watching us. And if we're not hope-filled, how in the world can we expect anybody else to be? And this is a great opportunity for each of us as leaders in our ministries and in our churches and in our communities to point people to the hope found only in Jesus. And, if we're not doing that now, shame on us.
Dan, your thoughts, last thoughts?
This is all really great, guys, and really appreciate it. I think what's neat about this whole pandemic is seeing the church all come together We're tearing down walls. We're helping each other out. That wasn't necessarily happening prior to. So it's awesome that it's happening right now. And Steve, I'm right there with you, man. Sports and recreation and fitness, that's not going anywhere. And it's a great opportunity for us to be creative. I think, Lauren, you shared some really good thoughts there to keep reaching people. I know some of you right now are probably even doing that virtually, which is fantastic. And so I'm just proud of the Capital C Church and all the parts that we all play with that, and just excited to see what God's going to do as we come out of this and as we experience our new normal.
My concluding thoughts would be along these lines. I know that we're all anxious to open back up, and we're anxious to get moving again. And some of us that our budget is even based upon our revenues that come in from our signups, we're at a particular tough spot here. Or we're in a spot that we think that it's possible that we might get furloughed or laid off because the church isn't meeting, the offerings are down, and unfortunately, the sports ministers are typically some of the first that are released in those budgetary crises for the church. And so I would say to you that I know there's an anxiousness to get started, but I'm going to ask you this question for your own evaluation. And it goes like this: what would be worse? Which would be worse for you to delay the opening and to make sure that things are good and you can do it in a organized, classy, well done way, or and maybe lose a couple people or offend a couple people, or that you open up and then suddenly, where did COVID come from? It came from your sports ministry. It came from your youth sports. And in the long term, which would be more harmful for you? And so Roger's words are very good to us earlier. And I'm not saying operate in fear. I'm saying we need to operate with best practices. And we need to really consider what we're doing. And as John had said, maybe this is the time to really reevaluate a whole bunch of things, and that you can maybe start something new at this particular time. So the end goal of my question to you is, we want to reach those who are far from Jesus in his church. And so if in fact, whatever we do, by opening up, holding off, opening up, whatever, I think we need to keep that as a primary thing, isn't it, for us all? All right, so I really thank everybody for taking time out of your day, and particularly to our panelists, thank you. And you probably can't hear everybody, but I'm sure they're all in their room clapping for you guys if we were all together. So we appreciate it. And keep in mind, next week, we're going to be doing another roundtable with the Fitness, Wellness, Wholeness Ministries. Debbie Brown from Houston first. Shane from Johnson's Ferry, where Lauren's from, is going to be there, as well as Asa, who is going to be the Reach presenter this year from Sweden. And I'm sure she's got a whole nother insight into us, because Sweden hasn't shut down at all. And so those are going to be some of our panelists for next week. And then we move on to how do we deal with the financial parts of this. And so you might want to even get your administrative pastors on board with you for that one. And then the facilities, we do have a facilities person who is running a 40-plus acre piece of property and huge facility, and what they're doing. And we're going to answer a lot of those questions from that perspective. So I appreciate everybody. Are all hearts clear? If so, just hit the little red button and exit on out.